Tonight's guest is John. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Vic. Glad to be here.
Well, it's great having you. John, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Okay. My name is John. I live in northern Indiana. I got married when I was really young, 17. Was into residential property management 21 years of my life. Moved to Florida. Lived there for 22 years. It's pretty much an uneventful life, aside from certain peculiar instances. After 22 years, wound up divorced from my first wife. Moved back to Indiana. I wouldn't change any of that, but once I moved back to Indiana, it's where I got back in contact with actually my very first love, and that is the wonderful woman I'm married to today. I'm currently retired. I took an early retirement. My wife is an RN, so she does pretty well, and I took the early retirement due to an unexpected pregnancy. I'm 48. And no, it wasn't planned. It happened, and I wouldn't change that for the world. So now I'm a stay-at-home dad. I get to see child raising from a whole different perspective. I'm really rather enjoying it.
Yeah, you get to see it firsthand. Congrats on the baby.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, you're welcome. You are welcome. John, your second encounter happened 32 years ago, and to say it had a big effect on you is a huge understatement. How often do you think about it present day?
Daily. I think about it daily. I'm not as horrified by it as I used to be. But yes, Vic, there's not a day that goes by that it doesn't cross my mind at least once.
Yeah, I can understand why it would. That's pretty traumatic.
It was very traumatic.
Yeah, I'd say it was. You have very strong feelings about people who say they want to have a Dogman encounter. Please expand on that for us.
Well, it's one thing to hear a story from someone about their encounter, and I don't know if it's maybe because they want to be a part of it, or just to say they've seen one, but I would have to say, seeing it firsthand, being as close as I was, I don't really believe they completely understand what it is they're asking, because I wouldn't wish that on anyone. I think those who think they want to, they just don't know what it is they're asking and what a profound effect it's actually going to have on you to see something step out of myth and legend and be there. It really does wreak havoc on your psyche after that. To see something that is not supposed to exist, it shatters your perception of reality instantly. And so for someone to say they want that, I don't believe they understand what it is they're asking.
That's all very well said. Yeah, it makes my hackles go up when I hear people talk about wanting to have an encounter. You come talk with all the eyewitnesses I've spoken with who've had their lives ruined because of the encounter they had, and you'll understand why my hackles go up when I hear people talk about how neat it would be to have a Dogman encounter.
No, sir, there's nothing neat about it. It's not neat at all. It's horrifying. It's terrifying. It will mess you up mentally.
Oh, no doubt. From what I understand, you underwent counseling for several years hoping to recover from that encounter. Did it help?
Not really. They were trying to treat me as they would anybody else who went through a traumatic experience. And I never really openly told them what I seen. They were basically just trying to treat me the same way they would, let's say, if somebody had a car accident that was traumatizing. We never got to the root of the issue. Of course, I knew what the issue was, but you can't really say that to a psychologist, or what are they going to think? So no, it really didn't help.
Yeah, that doesn't come as any surprise. It always cracks me up. From time to time, I'll receive an acerbic message from a listener who talks about how pointless it is what I do because it's as simple as the eyewitness just seeking help from a professional to get this help and recover from the encounter they've had that's ruined their lives or they're having trouble dealing with. But you just hit the nail on the head. If the psychologist doesn't know what's troubling you, then how can they help you deal with it? Not to mention the fact that if you did reveal to a psychologist that you saw a dogman, of course they're going to think you're crazy, so how can you approach professional help like that? So, yeah, it doesn't come as any surprise that when you sought that help, it didn't resolve anything.
It did not. Like you just said, if you tell them what the actual root of the problem is, they're going to be treating you for something other than the actual event.
Oh yeah, psychosis. And even if you were able to tell them what it was that you went through, they don't know anything about dogmen, so they're still not going to be able to help. So, like I said, you hit the nail on the head.
The best help I have had so far after all these years is speaking with you and finding your site.
Well, it goes without saying, I'm so glad to hear it's helped you so much. Yeah, that's why I do this. All right, John, please tell us about your encounters now. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Yes, sir. It was July 1990. If you know anything about Peru, Indiana, we are the Circus City capital of the world. Ringling Brothers houses here during the wintertime. In July, we have what's called Circus City Days, where they pretty much shut down 6 to 8 blocks of uptown. They set up rides and Ferris wheels and, the games, the food courts, things of that nature. And I was 16 at the time, and probably there was a good 15 of us that all hung out. We were good friends, in school, out of school. There were supposed to be 10 of us. We'd talked about going camping after being uptown during the Circus City event. It was going to be a 2-day thing. Me and the first 5 were going to set up camp, find a good spot that was close to town, if not in town, which the spot we came to was close to town. That's how we wound up where we were. It was maybe 6 blocks away from pretty much where everybody lived. The spot, let me try to describe it. If you start to head outside of town, we got what's called the Wabash River that winds through here. And there's a tree line that comes off of a set of railroad tracks that runs directly beside the river. Where we were was down by the west end of town. There's a bridge there. It was an old power plant, an alleyway just off of those tracks on the left side. And on the other side of that, there was maybe 15 homes there. It runs off of Canal Street. And on the other side is maybe about a 60, 70-yard stretch of woods that runs down parallel to the Wabash River. Down the berm. You got to go down the hill, maybe 25 feet or so off of the train tracks. And then the wood line starts. And then there's a trail, a main trail that runs through that section of woods. That is where we decided to set up camp at. It's in the woods, you're by the water, but yet you're still in town. So it's a 5-minute walk, literally, to anywhere any of us needed to go. But yet you're still out of sight. We were teenagers. That's how we wound up there. Anyways, we were all uptown, having a good time. We decided to leave a little early. It was starting to get dark. It was maybe 7. So the 5 of us, me and 4 other friends, decided to go set our camp up. So we left and got to the spot, pitched our tents, had a nice fire going, pretty much talking about what we were doing that evening, what we were going to do the following evening going back uptown. I would say by this time it was somewhere between 9:30, 10 o'clock. It's dark. We're all sitting around the fire, pretty much facing the same way, down the other side of this trail, with the river off to our right. And I had noticed, before the sighting ever even actually occurred, a smell, a really strange smell. I've heard people describe it kind of like a wet dog. This was something like that, but not exactly. If you have dogs or you've been around dogs in cold weather, they get a really funny smell when they come in from outside after being really cold. I don't know if you've ever smelled it, but it's a funky smell. I started noticing that smell. kind of mixed in with maybe garbage or carrion, but that was the pervasive smell. And I had noticed it for several minutes. So it had to have been there, I guess, watching us for several minutes. I did not see it at first. My buddy's sister, who was actually one of our buddies, she was one of the guys, had gasped. And when she gasped, I looked to where she was sitting, and her hands were steepled over her nose, just below her eyes, like in shock. So I follow her line of sight, which was almost directly in front of where I happened to be sitting, on the other side of the fire. At first, I didn't see what she was looking at. What I saw looked maybe like a tree that's been struck by lightning. It's dead. You can tell it's been there for a long time, standing up 6, 7 feet tall, you know. And I thought that's what I was looking at until it moved. And I realized that it isn't a tree. I couldn't focus on exactly what it was at first. And then I realized it was a torso, a huge torso, not overly large. I've heard some people say they look like bodybuilders. It wasn't exactly like that. If you've ever seen the movie The Howling, they got the head part wrong, but the body was almost spot on for what I was looking at. You couldn't really tell if it was hair or fur. I could tell that it was an extremely deep gray that faded into patches of black. And then I seen the head mounted on these shoulders. And around the eyes was black. Kind of like on a German Shepherd, how they got the black around the eyes and then it fades out to a brown. But it wasn't brown. It was a lighter gray. And ears that stood straight up on the top like a German Shepherd's ears. But they didn't look like they belonged on that head because the muzzle didn't look like a German Shepherd. It more resembled a pit bull, is kind of what it looked like. The muzzle wasn't short, but it wasn't overly long. I didn't see any teeth at first, but the eyes, they weren't exactly yellow. They weren't exactly gold. It was something in between. And they really stood out because of the darkness around the eyes. I just sat there staring because I don't think my brain was registering what I was looking at. Then I can't say if it took a step, it had to have, but I couldn't see the legs from where it was standing. There's sawgrass that runs through the woods, probably about 4 feet tall, in between the trees, you know? And that's what it was standing in next to the tree. So I couldn't see from like the knees down other than a hand. It wasn't a paw like you would expect to see on a dog. It wasn't a hand like a person's hand. If you've seen raccoons up close and you know what their hands look like, long, you can see where the bones join together. They were just really long and very narrow, like a raccoon's hands. They came to a point where they were much darker, like black, but they didn't look like nails. It looked like just an extension of the finger, but they came down to a point, if you understand what I mean. When it came forward, that is when I started to see the teeth. It opened its mouth just very slightly. And if I didn't know better, I would say it was actually tasting the air, is what it looked like to me. And I sat there just taking this in. It was probably 7 feet tall. The size alone is just, never mind the fact that you're looking at a creature that doesn't exist. How can something this large be basically in town like this, in the woods or not? My mind just clearly wasn't working right after taking this in, because I never looked around at anybody else to see what they were doing. I had no idea what they were doing. It was just like the only thing that existed at that very instant was me and it. Me looking at it, it looking at me. I don't know how long I would have sat there, because I think I was in shock. I really feel like I was in shock. Once my mind registered, this is a werewolf, because I had never heard the term Dogman, but I had heard the term werewolf. And so that is what sprang to mind. And by the time that thought sprang to mind, I could hear pounding, and it was getting fainter and fainter. That's when it occurred to me, they ran. That's when I looked around. They were gone. They bolted and just left me sitting there. Once that thought registered, I'm sitting here in the woods with this thing. I don't know if I blacked out or if it was just sheer terror clouding my reason, but the next thing I recall from a clear memory point is running up that gravel path to get back to the top of that embankment, to the tracks, to the alley, and then over to Canal Street. But I do not remember getting to my feet. I do not remember turning to run, because I don't think I would have put my back to that thing. But once I hit my feet and I was running, I never looked back. I ran all the way to my house. I never slowed down. I now know where the term your heart in your throat comes from, because it literally felt like it was going to come out of my mouth. I got home, panicked. My mom was there. I woke her up. I didn't tell her what was the problem. She went back to bed. She knew something was wrong. And I have no idea where the other four went. One of my buddies that was there did show back up that night, probably a little after midnight at my house, knocking on the window. We discussed what we saw, but after that night, we never talked about it again. The others that were with us refused to talk about it at all. In fact, they outright denied that they saw anything. I don't know if that was their coping mechanism, because maybe if we talk about it, then that makes it real. That means this happened. And so they never spoke another word about it. In fact, we never hung out again after that. Now, my friend that did come over that night after it happened, we did stay friends for a little while, but even we quit hanging around each other. And it was because of this one horrifying event. I don't know. You can call it a werewolf. You can call it a dogman. You can call it a lichen. I don't know what to call it other than a nightmare. And that instant, it turned my world upside down, because you realize that there are things in the dark. Even though you've been told as a child there's not, there is. I've had horrible nightmares for years. I did go through several years of counseling to try to fix it. I actually went through about a 3-year spurt where I drank very heavily, just trying to forget about it. And you can't. You just can't. But that was the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. I never want to see something like that ever again. I think that may not have been my first encounter, but it was the one that I was the closest to. I had an incident when I was about 13, TPing. If you guys know what TPing is, you go out with your friends and throw toilet paper in people's trees. Well, that's what we were doing. We snuck out and was toilet paper in people's trees. I'm not proud of that now, but that's what we were doing. And after being out for about 45 minutes, that smell, I smelled that smell for the first time in somebody's backyard, because they had a big, beautiful weeping willow that we were just about to load up in toilet paper. And the smell was accompanied by a growl that there's no way came from a regular dog. It was the sort of growl that you feel in your bones. So it was either really close or it was very large, but it was standing beside, right up next to this house. And there was no lights in this backyard. So it's pretty much pitch black except for the light of the moon. And I never got a good look at it. All I saw was a very large shadow and that smell, which at that age terrified me. So again, we ran home, and I don't know if it correlates with the sighting I described or if it was something else. I honestly can't say, Vic, but maybe it is. I don't know. Maybe once you have an encounter, you're going to have more. I hope not. I really hope not. But the more I'm listening to your show, the more I'm realizing that there is a connection there. And that was the first one. The one camping was the second one. That was the main one. That's the one that almost unhinged me. A year after that, I was with my current wife. We were just dating at that time. And there's a place called Peoria Fishing Pier. It's right above the Salamone Reservation. And there's walking trails down through there. And we had spent half the afternoon down there having a picnic, walking the trails. And it was getting on later in the evening. Didn't see anything that time either, but the smell was there as we were walking back to our car. It's now dark. The day was over. We were ready to leave. And the growl. We both heard it. We looked at each other and we literally fled for our lives. Looking back at it, picturing that growl, there's nothing I don't think that could have made that sound other than what I saw on the Wabash River that night in 1990. And I love the outdoors. I love to fish. I love to hike. I love to camp, but not around here anymore. Not unless it's somewhere where there's a lot of other people. I never go unarmed. And I don't camp on the Wabash no more. I'm not quite sure what else to say other than it has affected me to the point that there's just things I don't do that I used to do. I moved to Florida for 22 years, as I said at the beginning. Now I realize it was misguided, but the biggest reason I went down there, not just for work, but an irrational thought that if I can get as far away from here as I can, I'll never see something like that again. That was my reasoning. I realize now that that was foolish, but that's what I thought. I packed everything up and left. I figure if I'm in a big city like Tampa, no woods, no nothing like that, that I'll never see something like that again. But after listening to the show, I realized that they're everywhere. And so it doesn't much matter where you go. I also realized that had it wanted to get me, it would have got me. This thing was 6-7 feet on the other side of that fire ring. I was 5 feet on the other side. Maybe 15 feet away. That's how close it was. As close as the thing was, he could have got me at any time he wanted to. He could have got all 5 of us had he wanted to. He was close enough. I'm going to guesstimate 15 feet, maybe even a little closer. But the way that it just, the word I would use is ghosted. It just ghosted into the firelight. 1 second it wasn't there. There was nothing there. And the next second it was there. It never made a sound, but it could have. It was close enough that when it first appeared, as I sat there in shock looking at it, I could literally see its eyes scan right to left, looking at us sitting there. That's how close it was. And with the size of it, the way this thing was built, it's clearly an apex predator. There was clearly intelligence in those eyes. And honestly, I think that's as horrifying, Vic, as actually seeing the thing in person, is knowing that there's intelligence behind something like that's eyes. How do you rectify that in your own mind? How do you come to terms with the fact that these things are out there? You're told your whole life things like that don't exist. You're told your whole life that there's no proverbial monster under the bed. And when it hits you in the face, like it did me, that shatters what you thought was reality. Because you understand immediately that none of that's true. And there's no way you can go back to your normal life and look at things the same way again. You just can't. And that's kind of what I've dealt with. This July, it'll be 32 years. And until I found you and your site, there's nobody that I've really said that to. I can count on one hand the people in my life that I've actually confided this to. And although they say they believe you, you have to wonder in the back of your own mind, do they? Because if somebody was to tell me this story prior to this happening to me, I know what I would have thought. You were drinking or you were doing drugs or something. And then you see it with your own eyes. And then what do? Because I don't know. I didn't know. What do you really say to somebody after that? If somebody was to tell you that story and you weren't you and you didn't do this, what would you think? What would you say? How do you tell somebody that?
It goes without saying, it's just not fair that anyone should have to deal with an experience like that, but unfortunately, as you found out firsthand, sometimes they do happen. And like I've told you several times also before, it's not just you. You're not alone. You've got a lot of other people out there who've had experiences like this. So, yeah, that right there, that's a good start to being able to bounce back from that experience and dealing with it in a healthy way. So, as long as you can say that, then that's a really good start.
Absolutely. Well, you personally put me on that start, Vic, and for that I am eternally grateful. The answer's been in front of me for 32 years. And you're right. Had he wanted to get me, he'd have got me. He didn't. So that goes a long way to making me feel somewhat better. But it doesn't make me feel any better to know that these things are very real. These things exist. These things are out there. Although I'm not dead, obviously, I'm here to tell you what happened. So are a lot of other people. It still doesn't make me any more comfortable with knowing these things are out there.
Oh, sure, that's understandable. Yeah, there's life before you knew that dogmen were out there and life after.
That's exactly right, because it's never the same after. I don't care who you are, how mentally strong you are. You cannot witness something like that and be the same after. If you do, then I would have to doubt what you're telling me, because far be it for me, of all people, to tell somebody, hey, your experience didn't happen. How can I, after what I just got done telling you? But hearing some people casually discuss it and say, well, I still I still do this. No, I'm sorry. There's no way you possibly could. If you had seen what I saw, what the other 4 with me that night saw, you cannot be casual about it. You cannot be blasé about it. It will mess up your perceptions and your sense of reality to know that nightmares are real. Very, very real. But I was 16 and I had never heard of a Dogman. Like I said, back at that time, the only movie I had to correlate that with was The Howling. And as far as I was concerned, it had jumped right off the big screen and was standing there in the woods with, that will mess you up. It messed me up for many, many years. Honestly, as I said the other day, I had never heard the term Dogman until just the last several years. I always equated it with a werewolf or a lichen or whatever other people want to call them. All I can say, all I know for sure, beyond any doubt at all, is they are real. They are out there. I think part of what haunts me was not just seeing it, not just experiencing that, but these things are real. And so what else have we been told that isn't real is real? You have to take a step back and think about everything you've ever been told. Because if something like this is roaming this earth today, what else is roaming the earth with us?
That's a really good point. Yeah, if dogmen are out there, are vampires out there, and who knows what else. If you've had a dogman encounter and would like to talk with me about it, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. If you've had a Sasquatch sighting and would like to be a guest on one of my 2 Bigfoot shows, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let me know. Listening to you recount that encounter, it's obvious how much the experience affected you, and understandably so, but which anatomical feature on that dogman did you find to be the most disturbing?
It's a toss-up between the eyes, and I say the eyes just because I saw intelligence in the eyes. In the peculiar golden yellowish color. Maybe it was the way the campfire was reflecting off of them, but that's how they appeared to me. I think secondly, the hands. It was the oddest thing. You expect to see maybe paws on something that looks like that. I don't know what you would expect to see, but the eyes and the hands, they were so long, and you could see where the knuckles and the joints come together. It reminded me of a raccoon. That's the closest thing I can equate it to. Was just how funny those hands looked, like they belonged on an oversized raccoon. And the way they ended, I couldn't tell if they were claws or if it was just an extension of the finger. They were so dark, just like the rest of the hand, that I couldn't tell if it was a claw like a fingernail or a claw like on a dog. It all seemed to be one piece with the finger. That, to me, was disturbing. The whole thing was disturbing. Just the fact that it's real is very disturbing. But the eyes and the hands, I would say, if you see the hands, you won't forget that. You won't forget any part of the encounter, but they were so almost ethereal, if you know what I mean. Very long hands, very long fingers. The head, of course, was disturbing. It didn't appear, as I've heard others describe it, the head was proportional to the body. The ears weren't. They were like a German shepherd's, like if you took the ears off of a German shepherd and stuck it on the face of and muzzle of a pit bull. That's what it looked like. Either black, like I was saying, or such a deep, deep shade of gray, it was almost black. I never saw from like the knees down because of the way the grass was. Maybe it was how it was standing. But I didn't see from there down, just from like the torso up. It was in shape, but not like a bodybuilder. There was lighter hair on the chest area. I've heard people say it was hairless in the chest, but it wasn't. It was just such a fine covering of hair. It was really light. It wasn't until maybe the outer edges, like under the underarm area that wrapped up and around, is where the longer hair, the darker colored hair, actually started at. It was very dark.
They don't have any soft edges to them. Yeah, everything about them is terrifying. You said that you only saw it from the waist up, but does that mean that you never saw if it had a tail or not?
I could not see if it had a tail or not. It was straight across from me. And so I only seen it straight on. I couldn't tell if it had a tail, couldn't tell how the legs were. All I saw was from like the waist up, more or less.
Well, no one can hold that against you. I mean, after all, you're just trying to hold it together there, so yeah, no harm, no foul there.
It was extremely close. That's the only reason why. I don't know what I was thinking, Vic. I don't think my mind was working. My eyes were working, but from what my eyes were relaying to my brain wasn't processing what I was looking at, you know?
Of course. Yeah, when you have an experience like that, your brains are going to be running out your ears, so that's totally understandable. When it was standing there across the fire ring from you, did it ever give you the impression it was going to run around that fire ring and grab you, or did it just stand there stock still?
It was just standing there. It didn't growl. It didn't make any noises. It didn't chase out after us or anything like that. It just ghosted out. It stood there, and then like a half a step forward closer. And that's when I realized everybody had left me. I guess that's when I decided to run. Like I said, I don't recall getting to my feet and running. I don't remember that at all. It's just like a blank spot. My next coherent thought was running up that gravel on the incline of the embankment and trying to get to the alley and out of there. But I don't remember doing that.
Well, I can understand why they did, but that was pretty dirty of your friends to leave you there with it.
It was, but honestly, I don't hold it against them. I really don't. You can't see something like that, and the word fear isn't strong enough. It's sheer, blinding, gibbering, unadulterated terror, like I have never felt in my life, is what settles in on you. I was mad at the time. I was a teenager, I'm not now. Anybody that's got common sense is going to flee. I mean, I guess it's not their fault that it just shocked me into mobility. They ran while I sat. The term immobile with fear, I don't think applied to me at that point. It just didn't occur to me to get up and run, I guess you could say. Looking back on it, I think I was just in complete and total shock. I really do.
Oh, you must have been. And you just mentioned the word terror, terrified. When you think about the emotions you dealt with and you have dealt with as a result of that encounter, do you get frustrated by the overuse of the word terrified?
Yes, I do. I really do. That was the only time in my life I would apply that word. We've all been scared. We've all felt fear, but I don't think everybody has experienced sheer blind terror. They'll throw the word out, like you just said, without any concept of what terror actually is. That is terror.
Yeah, that is. You told us about the nightmares you've had. When you have had Dogman-related nightmares, though, have they always been related to that encounter you just told us about where you're standing across the fire ring from that one, or have the other two experiences kind of weighed in as well?
I think it's a little bit of both. Sometimes it's being back on the Wabash and reliving it, only it ends differently. But other times, no, it's not always there. It's just sometimes I'll be like in town, walking down an alley, going home or something, and it'll be there. It's not always keyed to that location. Sometimes it's just random. I've dreamed they've been in my house. I've dreamed I woke up and they were standing over me in the bedroom. That sort of thing. But it's always the same creature. Always.
Yeah, I can only imagine how difficult it has been to deal with those nightmares. That's horrible. How close is the part of town where you had that experience by the river to the edge of town?
Probably about 1/8 of a mile. There's only a few more homes on that side of the river where we were. The homes stop right there. Now, if you go to the other side of the Wabash, they continue on, but it's only one string of homes, and there's maybe another 12, 15 homes on that side, and then it goes out of town. It wraps around and goes out into farmers' fields, woods. The wood line's unbroken that runs along the Wabash, even in town. It gets narrow, but I guess the only breaks is where the two bridges in Peru are. But they run right to the edge of the bridge. So if you're in those woods, you could go under the bridge, pop out the other side, back into the woods, and never be seen, even dead center of town. Yeah, I would say maybe 1/8 of a mile before you're outside of town. Where we were, you're still very much in town, which is one of the things that shocked me about it, I think, more than anything. What is something like this doing in town? I think a lot of cities or small towns have woods on the outer edge that run through like that and run into town. So you feel like you're not in town when you're in the woods or you're standing down there camping or fishing or something like that. But yeah, when you get right down to it, you're still very much in town where we were.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, they do come into towns all the time. That's just one more thing about them that's so disconcerting. You described it as being a werewolf in a nightmare. In your opinion, do you think it was more than likely a werewolf, or do you think it was just a dogman?
I think it was a dogman. I know we've touched on that briefly prior to this, but I think a werewolf is a concept that was created very likely due to a sighting of a dogman. I think they're very different things. A werewolf is supposedly a man that transformed. I think these things always were what they are. I think there is a difference. I think a werewolf is a fantasy that came about due to sightings of dogmen. I believe that. I also believe that every myth and legend starts with a grain of truth somewhere. And I think possibly that's where the term werewolf or lichen or lycanthropy came from. I believe there is a distinct difference. One is real. I've seen it. And the other one you watch in movies.
It's good to understand that. Yeah, there definitely is a difference. Has listening to the show been cathartic for you, or does it hurt more than help by making you anxious, reflecting on your encounter?
No, it helps. I think it helped more than anything to realize that I'm not crazy. I'm not nuts. I saw what I saw, and it's very evident to me that I'm not the only one. That is key to me. I'm not the only one who's seen that. In a strange sort of way, although I believe I lost those friends over this, I'm still glad that I am not the only one there that's seen it. But knowing that there are others aside from myself and them who never talked about it, that there are other people willing to say, yes, I saw that too. It helps greatly. What you do helps greatly.
Well, when you hammer home the point that it's not just you, that's a tremendous help, so I'm glad to do that in addition to whatever else I can do to try and help. Do you consider yourself to be a religious man, John?
Well, Vic, I believe in God. I do not believe in religion. I believe religion is a man-made concept. That's why you have so many different denominations and sects in churches and things of that nature. I believe wholeheartedly in faith. I do not believe in man-made religion.
If you believe in faith, what kind of an effect has your encounter or have your encounters had on your faith?
Honestly, it shook it for a while. It really did. It's very hard to maintain that faith after seeing something of that nature. But then again, on the flip side of that coin, later in life, it helped hammer home and make my faith more solid. Because whether it was its intent to harm, which it did, although not physically, it harmed me mentally. And I think that caused me far more damage than if it would have come out and attacked me and I would have lived. It did enough damage mentally, but I did lean on my faith in later years after that. If it wasn't for that, I don't know where I would be at right now.
Well, it goes without saying, I'm so glad your faith helped you deal with this and get through all this. That's great. You have Dogman tattoos. What's the story behind that?
I do. I've got 2 on my legs and 1 going up my side. Although it's an experience that clearly I will never forget, will never leave me, it's just a reminder. I wanted to get a sketch done of exactly what it was that I saw. Maybe it was a coping mechanism of some sorts to help, but yes, I did have it tattooed on me. And I guess in its own way, that helps me too.
Well, I'm sure it does help. No matter what it takes to deal with that experience, by all means, do it. I'm glad you did that. I'm sure that was an interesting conversation with the tattoo artist, though.
Yeah, I didn't tell them why. They just said, yeah, that's pretty neat. And I sketched it up and they redid it so it looked a whole lot better, of course. I'm not an artist, but he gave me pretty much what I was describing to him. I didn't say, hey, I saw this, by any means. He just thought it was a really cool thing. And I guess tattoo artists nowadays, with it being such a big thing, they just don't question it. You want it on you, they put it on you. So,
yeah, that's about it. Well, it's about time for us to get out of here, John. But before we do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
I do. If this is the first time you're listening, or even if it's not, if anything I have said resonates with anybody out there, don't keep it bottled up. Get a hold of somebody preferably Vic Cundiff, and talk about it. Whether you feel silly or not, you have to, because if you leave that bottled up, it's going to eat you alive. I know I've thanked you before, but I have to thank you again wholeheartedly. When you had interviewed me, I had no idea of your own personal loss, and my condolences. I am very sorry. And I think the fact that you still took the time out to contact me and check on my well-being makes you a man among men. God bless you for that.
I'm so glad to hear that talking with me has helped you the way it has. But having said that, John, thanks again so much for coming on. Have a great night.